Go, Dave. We're going to move on. The day after the Northern Territory coroner ruled baby Azaria Chamberlain had been taken by a dingo near Uluru in 1980, Lindy Chamberlain-Creighton has spoken of how people unfairly judged her and her former husband Michael for how they reacted to the tragedy. She says much of the criticism centred around the fact that people didn't see them cry. But Mrs Chamberlain-Creighton says they did cry and sometimes in front of the media, but the journalists left those pictures out of their stories.
It gave the impression that we were very stoic and, you know, no emotion, that sort of thing. And look, it wouldn't have mattered what we did. If we didn't react exactly the same as the individual watching us reacted, that individual thought we were being weird. We've got numerous letters from people saying, I don't know why they say that, you did exactly what I would have done, I thought you were perfectly normal. So, you know, what's normal? Who's normal, you or me?
Malcolm Brown, a senior journalist for the Sydney Morning Herald, was first assigned to cover the story 1 month after Azaria disappeared. And in an interview aired for Radio National earlier this month, he said observers judged Lindy Chamberlain-Creighton because of what she didn't do.
There's no law saying how people should react to traumatic circumstances. People react in many different ways, sometimes strange ways, but there's no rule. That might look a bit funny, a bit odd, but you've an example of a father runs over his child when he reverses his car some people hysterical, some people calm, some people spiritual. There's all sorts of ways, and just because someone doesn't react the way that you think they should react doesn't mean anything.
Fiona, why have people been so judgmental in this case, do you think?
I think there's a really nasty tendency in humankind in general, baying for blood and the sort of whole stacks on mentality that comes when something like this happens. And this was a huge story. I was in, I think, 5th grade when this happened, and I remember it was because it was also an unusual story too, like a baby being taken by a dingo. It had sort of a lot of elements that would make it, you know, great fodder for tabloid. Well, not only tabloid, just it was something that was sort of a striking event. And then with, as Lindy Chamberlain-Creighton said in that interview, her reaction was so people were watching her, and then as the commentary built and built and built, there was this huge sense, I remember at the time, this huge sense of judging her, and people were talking about it all the time.
Everyone had an opinion, didn't they?
Everyone had an opinion. Like, I was in 5th grade and people were talking about it in the schoolyard, and the whole thing was that she was guilty. And I remember hearing adults talking about it and saying, oh, you know, she was very cold and all this sort of stuff. And I think there is, sadly, a tendency of people to, you know, get a sort of prurient, I don't know, some sort of pleasure out of judging others.
Jack, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, look, the first thing is the incident, dingo taking Azaria Chamberlain, had never been heard of before. So it stretched credibility for a lot of people. And then secondly, we had this sort of judgment thing sort of going on. And there are 2 lessons.
And her religious...
Yeah, the religion had a good deal to do with it too. But there are 2 lessons here. The first one is you shouldn't try anybody by media because you will almost certainly get it wrong. Don't try people by the court of public opinion. And secondly, and in a broader sense, the forensic evidence that was used to convict her was a furphy. And going forward, this is one of the lessons that we have to take in terms of the criminal justice system. We now place far too much weight on forensic evidence. Personally, I blame the Miami CSI type shows. Everyone thinks they're an expert on these things.
They would have picked that dingo.
But you know, we see it. You know, you see people. You know, an accused DNA was found at the scene, and you'll see this in reports. 1 in 2 trillion likelihood of it being another person, and so forth. You know, we forget that DNA can be taken into a crime scene, and so. But nevertheless, this is very compelling for juries when they get forensic evidence. They place too much import on it, and this is what happened with Lindy Chamberlain. It continues on to this day.
David, to go back to the opinion issue, George Megalogenis tweeted today a 1984 Gallup poll found that 76.8% of Australians thought Lindy Chamberlain was guilty. Extraordinary figure, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I guess that goes to, you know, a jury found her guilty, and that then sullies the mind of a lot of people. Now, as my understanding of it, and I was pretty young at the time, but my understanding of it was that the judge's directions to the jury should have indicated they probably should have gone for an acquittal. But
I think it was very strong. Yeah, the judge was very strong.
But the jury didn't, and as a result, that sullied the mind of everybody. And I mean, I just feel for that family that for 30 years, they've tried to get some sort of justice. They've been judged so harshly by so many, and 30 years of their entire life has been defined by this one event, tragic event that happened back in 1980. And, you know, I mean, I'm amazed that the other children have done pretty well, frankly, considering this. I mean, the pressure that's on them, you think about, you know, the children of whether it's public figures or whoever it might be and what they go through, what these people have been through for 30 years. You know, I mean, I tell you what, for those that judge them to probably hang their heads in shame, I mean, I'm so glad that they've finally got a resolution to this and can try and change perhaps the rest of their life, although I don't know how, you know, they're not going to continue to be defined by this.
And Fiona, interesting role of the media in all of this. In that interview Malcolm Brown did for Radio National, he said at the time there was a tabloid war going on in Sydney between the Sun and the Mirror, and so people were competing to get the best story.
And there was all sorts of stuff like Azaria means death in sacrifice.
All these myths.
I don't know if that was in the press or if that was just...
Yeah, no, that was definitely reported on as well. But it's interesting that only two journalists have come out and apologised, and that Lindy Chamberlain Creighton made that point today, that only two had apologised over that 32 years.
Well, Wendy Harmer wrote a great piece, you know, saying that she had, you know, made dingo jokes and you know, saying how she felt bad about what she'd done, and a genuine apology. And I think, you know, while there are might have only been two media people come out and apologise, and that's shameful, I would hope that quite a lot of the Australian public who were, you know, baying for blood at that time and lapping up all that stuff, might then take a lesson from that and think, OK, next time there's a trial by media, maybe we should stop and sort of think, this is a trial by media, and understand that there are, you know, once things get into the, you know, tabloid blood frenzy, then there's going to be a lot of misconceptions.
Well, 76.8% of Australians, of those people polled anyway, should perhaps apologise.
Was that before
but
or
seriously,
So it was 84.
How is that poll ever taken? The poll itself is a disgrace.
Yeah, that is, because that gives the impression that it is something to be...
The sad thing is nothing has really changed when it comes to these sort of, well, not even these issues, anything controversial. Anytime there is a trial by media, effectively, or a lot of media focus before something gets to court, you know, and there's been a few examples just this year
in politics.
People make judgments, and they've made absolute judgments, you know, without even reading any of the documentation or report, you know, or evidence. People have made judgments, and I'm not making a judgment one way or the other on events this year, but, you know, I don't think anything, sadly, fundamentally has changed.
No, not a lot learnt.